Hey there! Today we will be talking about the disease sickle cell anemia.
This is a genetic disorder affecting the protein hemoglobin, which transports oxygen to red blood cells in the body.
The affected hemoglobin molecules distort red blood cells into a sickle or crescent shape. This causes a low number of red blood cells, repeated infections, and periodic episodes of pain.
Once a baby is born with sickle cell anemia, it's usually present at birth. The U.S. requires all newborn babies to be screened for sickle cell anemia so that parents can be notified as soon as possible.
Most infants, however, do not start showing symptoms of sickle cell anemia until they are 5 to 6 months old.
Some symptoms early on in life may include dactylitis, which is painful swelling of the feet, fatigue or fussiness from anemia, and a yellowish color of the skin known as jaundice, or in the whites of the eyes known as icterus.
This yellowish pigment is caused when many red blood cells hemolyze. This is the rupture or destruction of red blood cells.
Although this is a normal process that breaks down normal red blood cells every 110 to 120 days, sickle cell anemia causes red blood cells to break down sooner.
Hemolysis is then a harmful process to those with sickle cell anemia because it causes healthy cells to die early on.
Normal red blood cells are smooth and change their shape to move through blood vessels, but sickle cells are rigid and are likely to block blood vessels.
The different shape prevents the proper flow of oxygen to vital organs because the cells get stuck in the blood vessels.
Pain develops when sickle-shaped red blood cells block blood flow through tiny blood vessels in your chest, abdomen, and joints. Pain can also occur in your bones. These periodic episodes of pain, called crises, are a major symptom of sickle cell anemia.
The organs suffer from not receiving enough oxygen because the cells that make the organs need oxygen to live. Organs affected are the spleen, liver, kidneys, lungs, and heart.
When red blood cells sickle, they break down prematurely, which leads to anemia. Anemia can cause a shortness of breath, fatigue, and delayed growth and development in children. This disease follows the autosomal recessive pattern, and the hemoglobin beta gene is found on chromosome 11.
To have an autosomal recessive disorder, one must inherit 2 mutated genes, one from each parent. These disorders are usually passed on by 2 carriers. Their health is rarely affected, but they have 1 mutated gene, the recessive gene, and 1 normal gene, the dominant gene, for the condition.
Codominance at a molecular level is also possible. Codominance is when both alleles are dominant. This results in the presence of both alleles in the genotype. In regards to hemoglobin, codominance is possible if HbS and Hba are both inherited. Each allele codes for a different form of hemoglobin, so each type of hemoglobin is expressed in the organism.
Recent research has found that people who inherit 1 copy of a sickle cell allele have a resistance to malaria. A component of the mutation is often found in nations where malaria is frequent, with 10 to 40% of the population carrying the mutation.
Environmental influences increase the severity of the disorder.
People with only 1 allele for sickle cell anemia can have their condition become worse because of environmental factors.
Some examples of environmental influences include physical exertion, fever or illness, high elevation, exposure to cold, dehydration, stress, and trauma.
All of these examples involve a decreased amount of oxygen, causing red blood cells to change shape because the hemoglobin isn't carrying enough oxygen.
Although environmental factors can worsen the disorder, nature is the stronger determining factor for sickle cell anemia.
This is true because the disease is inherited by the parents. The genetic disorder cannot be caused by anything other than the alleles given to offspring.
The code to make the protein hemoglobin is inherited and becomes a part of your DNA.
The different hemoglobin alleles received from the parental generation can be expressed at the same time. Sickle cell anemia is therefore more common, but there are many different cases of the disease depending on the genotype.
When the hemoglobin alleles are both A, then the red blood cells are completely normal and can never sickle. When both alleles S and A are expressed for blood cell shape, we have incomplete dominance.
When S and S are expressed, disease is fully expressed with severe anemia and red blood cells have a sickle shape. The extreme case of this type of inheritance can cause death.
50% of patients with sickle cell anemia survived beyond the 5th decade.
The phenotype is a combination of recessive and dominant traits. HbA is the dominant allele over the recessive allele HbS.
The abnormal protein hemoglobin is something that can't be altered easily, so misshapen red blood cells are constantly made this way until death, depending on what type of disease is inherited.
Another important genetic factor is the interaction between sickle cell anemia and other blood disorders. For example, thalassemia is a blood disorder passed down through families in which the body makes an abnormal form of hemoglobin. One form of thalassemia, called B thalassemia, reduces the production of normal hemoglobin.
A person with one normal hemoglobin gene and one thalassemia gene has the thalassemia trait. Should one parent have the sickle cell trait and the other have the thalassemia trait, any child they conceive has 1 chance in 4 of receiving one gene for the sickle cell disease and one gene for B thalassemia.
Another hemoglobin disorder that interacts with sickle cell disease is hemoglobin C. The abnormal hemoglobin C protein is relatively harmless. People with 2 hemoglobin C genes have a relatively mild clinical condition termed hemoglobin C disease. When hemoglobin C combines with hemoglobin S, the result is hemoglobin SC disease.
On average, hemoglobin SC disease is milder than sickle cell disease. However, some patients with hemoglobin SC disease have a clinical condition as severe as any with sickle cell disease. The tendency of hemoglobin C to produce red cell dehydration is a major reason that the combination of hemoglobins S and C is so problematic.
Lastly, sickle cell anemia is mostly determined by nature because it is incurable. Abnormal sickle hemoglobin red blood cells cannot change to the normal shape, so it can only be treated to lessen the severity of symptoms.
People with this genetic disorder are born with it and cannot develop it later in life from any environmental factors, so nature is the stronger determining factor.